Allison here in Marigold Cottage. The sun is out. The snow is melting. I can hear the drip, drip, drips outside. I can see my neighbor's grass, which is great. It was super slippery this morning. I think we have one more round of cold here, that whatever Alberta Clippers coming down for a couple days, and then knock on wood, the Farmer's Almanac says early spring for the south. So I'm gonna lean into that. I did go on keen garlic today. I have some keen garlic growing out of my garden, but I ordered some German gold potatoes and some French fingerling potatoes to plant. I didn't do potatoes last year because I was too busy digging up garden beds and I was behind. And here you actually have to put potatoes out like in late February. So I missed out on the potato season last year, but I'm thinking about doing some potatoes this year, and I ordered shallots and some sweet onions. So I guess I have to get intermediate day because I guess northern parts of the US you can do long day onions, but in the South we need intermediate, I guess. So anyway, we'll see how that goes. I planted some onion sets last year from over at Lowe's or something, and they went to seed right away because I planted them too late, and then it got really hot, and then they all were like, oh, we're done, we're making babies and being done. So I used them quickly as scallions, but I'm going to try onions again this year. So that was part of my morning task, and now today I wanted to talk a little bit about my maps. But before I delve into the maps, my friend Laura last night sent me a trailer from, I guess, Google DeepMind that premiered maybe yesterday about this Genie immersive world building situation that they just launched for their like high-end subscribers. Now, I don't have subscriptions to any kind of AI systems, and so I don't know how that all works. But it's interesting because the trailer, and I can put it in the link in the bottom, but it starts maybe not the very first thing, but like in the first maybe 10 or 15 seconds, it sort of creates these worlds that there may be a dozen on the screen, and they're all in circles, right? So it's like all these little windows into different kinds of worlds that you individually build with these little text boxes. And so you just type in the kind of world you want and the kind of character you want to be, and it will whoop, like make that world available. And so it's all of these little windows, which are exactly like the Holon/magic circle that I was talking about. So that was kind of an interesting coincidence. And I was thinking about that. And I have a section of my map. It's the Lindisfarne Association, and it got so big with a bunch of non-related Lindisfarne stuff that I kind of put all these placeholders, but I hadn't fully fleshed it out yet as of the spring, and I still haven't fleshed it out. But there was a section in there that I found really interesting that was related to Joy Ito of the MIT Media Lab. And in his mid to later 20s, he was really into immersive gaming, multiplayer gaming systems, and connected with Timothy Leary and sort of became Timothy Leary's, one of his godsons. I guess he had sort of a group of people that he would mentor or be connected with. And so Joy Ito was exploring this idea of multi-user dungeons, which are not dungeons as in like bad things happen to you in the dungeon that you're in prison, but more like exploratory collaborative spaces in these kind of text-based games. And I've never played text-based games, so I'm not sure how that goes. I did come across one when I was doing my ed tech research, a couple of Mormon guys out of Brigham Young, and they developed this text-based game, fantasy game, but they trained it on a bunch of romance novels. So it would always end up going into like inappropriate situations with young people. And then that was sort of headlines for a minute there. But I don't know how all the text-based games go. But now the text-based, you can see, is melded onto the back end of creating these predictive models of not just the next word, but the next image, the next laminated space-time part of reality. And so this is what's being laid out. And it's kind of interesting to see the comments because, again, I'm kind of in a position now where I can sort of see Google as an archetypal character, right? And it's been built up to be a certain thing. I'm sort of inhabiting this space now that, like, I don't know what it actually is. I've talked to quite a few people lately. I said, I don't know what the I in CIA is. We imagine, I think there's a placeholder for the Central Intelligence Agency as, the deep state or the bad guys or things. But what if the I is some other kind of intelligence? And so we use it as a placeholder for maybe sneaky spy bad guy United States global domination stuff, or, you know, MK Ultra stuff, or just this sort of dark, shadowy presence. But what if the I is actually, the I intelligence is some other thing, right? And so there's the nests and the onion layers of the narrative, right? At one point, it is the shadowy government agency, but then maybe at a higher point, the intelligence is something that we might not be able to imagine yet. And so that's kind of how I'm holding the Google stuff now. I'm like, oh, just to set them up, like Peter Thiel is like the bad guy, which I did for a long time. I have you put Google into my blog and there will be lots of stuff that comes up about Google. I'm being like pushing back against Google. But now I'm like, oh, okay, well, maybe it's not even what I thought, right? I built a niche and a story around what I thought Google was with the information I had at hand, but I've expanded into a bigger space and now I can maybe hold a bigger story. So I'm going to see how it unfolds. But it's interesting to look in the comments, and you know, somebody had some shocker, you know, snarky comments underneath it. And people are like, well, are we going to tell the guy that like he's the managed character and he's being simulated or like puppeted kind of? And this gets back to my frame is like, well, what if the goal is not to homogenize everyone or kill everybody and make everybody puppets and do the same thing, but is actually to create a dynamic game board where the participatory universe becomes more actionable with those of us who aren't aware of the idea of a participatory universe, and that we engage in ongoing gameplay with other characters in these immersive spaces that keep records of relationships and logs, and then can step us up in this sort of Gordon Paskian style into a higher level of being. I mean, it's possible. I'm not saying it's necessarily definitely that, but I think you could hold that as one possibility that might be interesting. So I put in the comments something like, well, it could be sort of collective intelligence computation, like a psychic ant computer. Look up Tchaikovsky's work, Children of Time. Nobody gets it because everybody's working at the very low-hanging fruit. And I'm hoping maybe somebody in there will chime in and see what I'm talking about. But essentially what I was saying about the Holons being possibly an infrastructure, a gamified, playful infrastructure for this next phase of collective biological computation that's held within a framework of relationships that looks like an engineered intelligence that may actually be some ancient energy system. That, wow, you know, I talk about it and then the next day, whoop, here Google obliges me with a perfect example. And maybe that's how the participatory universe works. So just be mindful of what you wish for or what you put out in the world, because it might just show up, right? And that's the space I'm holding right now, is let's hold resonance for the positive thing, because why not? And so, yeah, so that happened. And then I was talking with my friend Lynn this morning, and I was like, wow, this reminds me, you could go into your virtual world, right? Your multi-user dungeon, right? Invite your friends over to play. You could be the Shiba Inu, and someone could be the spaceman, and somebody could be the cowboy, right? And you could all play these characters. And there's some stuff in one of my maps. It was essentially talking about, in this quantum information boundary, we're leaving information on... We're leaving information for one another. And this information, it's like an ant trail, can persist even when you're not there. So you could go into a gamified world and move stuff around. And as my former friend Joseph once said, he was like, well, anything can be a signal, right? It just that we have an agreed upon understanding of what the meaning is. And Chris Fields talks about that too. If we have a common understanding, if you go in and into the gaming environment and the tree branch is bent this way, you know, then it means this, or go this way, or whatever. And so as long as the signal is understood, you could have asynchronous gameplay in a game world, and that could look like informational computation or discovery or something like that. I think that's kind of interesting. And so one of the things I wanted, so it's stigmergic information, gaming. You know, the thing about Timothy Leary that I don't think people talk about as much is that the PhD work that he did at Berkeley, his dissertation was on something called the cyclotron, but the cyclotron was PSY. So he was playing on the idea of people being like atoms, and like the movement and the resonance, that it was all relationality. And he was involved in a lot of group therapeutic settings that were, this is, I think, the really psychedelic stuff, but it was group interaction. So psychodrama, right? Or live action role play or improv, that there's something about getting people together and then new things come out of it. And So you've got Joy Ito and immersive text gaming. You have Timothy Leary. Joy Ito was introducing Stuart Brand and other people at the time to Daniel Suarez's books, Demon and Freedom, about a video game designer who passes away and then has this AI parsing the news. And when it gets notified of it's his death in the obituary, then it starts activating smart contracts where the digital virtual world starts to interact with the real world through also like virtual payment systems, and it unfolds. And so it's quite a violent. I've mentioned this before. Demon, Daemon, is the first book, and I'm surprised it hasn't been made into a Hollywood movie because it's got a lot of like shoot 'em up kind of things with like DARPA equipment and everything. It would be perfect for Hollywood. And I'm not such a fan of that part, but you have to read the first one to get to the second one, which is Freedom, which is all about Holons. And it's interesting because the main center of the Holon is in Greeley, Iowa. And Iowa, of course, is Neil Stephenson territory. And so it's this agrarian community that is also very high tech. So you have agrarian, which is sort of the tokenized permaculture and the interdimensional Deva conversation, although that's not part of the book, but I think that's an interesting element. So, and it's all augmented reality, reputation scoring, all the things. And he wrote this maybe 15 years ago. And so Jordan Hall of the Game B stuff, he and neurohacking, he wrote an introduction to a second edition of Demon. And so he's I don't know if it's him or somewhere in reading about Demon and Freedom, it was understood that, in these gatherings of people who were kind of in the know about what was coming, you could sort of lean in and go, have you read Demon and Freedom? And if the other person had, then it was a shorthand that you could like jump to the juicy stuff to talk about. You didn't have to like lay it all out for people. And so I think those two books are really important, and they were based on gaming and holons and augmented reality. And so we're moving. Here we go, right? I mean, they don't say that you're going to jump into a gamified virtual world and start collecting tokens with your friends and doing interdimensional language processing. But if you follow the work Lynn and I have done around open education resources, you can see how that would easily fit into like an immersive world gaming. And there's a big push in the Dallas metro area for this model of school that's a hybrid school, some in person, a lot of it online, where children, quote unquote, go to school in a virtual video game. And it's called STEMuli, STEM, like science, technology, engineering, and math. And you have an avatar, and you walk around in this gaming environment, and there's this hovering eyeball space satellite that tracks you around. And it was, when we started looking at that maybe 4 or 5 years ago, the interface was clunky, right? It was not very refined and stiff, and it looks sort of Minecrafty. But you can see how if you hook it on the back end to Google, and of course, Google took over all the education email accounts and the Google Drives. You mesh that up with Google and the capacity of these kinds of Google DeepMind world building simulations, and you can see how this thing could take off in a really big way. And for me, I can now see that this would equate to there's something called the Learning Economy Foundation, like learningeconomy.io, and they're connected with the World Bank, and it's all about badges and avatars. And it's still somewhat small. I think the basis, it was Colorado, Broward County, Florida, and Singapore. And it's just bubbling on the background. Like they have connections to Lego, which was one of the main sponsors of early MIT Media Lab. And I could see how a learning economy of tokens and badges could seamlessly go into this DeepMind world building and mesh it with a Stemuli hybrid charter school choice model. And you've got a learner wallet that's your digital identity, and you're building, it's like that learning is earning video, right? Like I'm a scientist, and I'm learning science, and I'm solving protein folding problems, and I'm earning money, and I'm a scientist, and I'm a student, and all of these things get mushed up together. And as I mentioned yesterday, the challenge is with the free energy principle, how does one adjust a world model, and how can we physically begin to process these major shifts that stem from changes in information physics and global connectivity and keep up with the changes. Like it's literally painful for our minds and our bodies, and energetically exhaustive. That's why everybody's anxious and depressed, because we can't jump into the new model yet. Like we're holding on to the old model because it's the model we know and we're comfortable with, and we don't know about that new thing, and we don't even have one put together yet. And then we're being asked to like both, you know, play defense on all the new stuff that's coming in, and we don't have a model to occupy, and we're not sure that that model feels good to us or collectively that we would agree to it, and we can't build it yet because we can't even occupy that space. We're in this weird phase transition. Like that's what I feel like. And you know, and for me, that's why having the lens of the curious observer feels really super important right now. So anyway, so thank you, Laura, for bringing up the Google DeepMind. Let me see if I have any other notes. Yeah, like you could see where the crypto play to earn stuff. You know, I had that run-in with Derek Bros about that. There is something in that Benjamin Bratton talk with Long Now that I mentioned about planetary computation. Two ideas that, topics that I think are really interesting to consider. He brought up Lynn Margulis's work with Symbiogenesis, which is the idea of these multicellular organisms being like a collective of bacteria that join together to make multicellular life. And that links to like mitochondria and ATP production, and that sort of two things like glom together. And so that feels a little bit like us and engineered intelligence, or the field, or whatever that looks like that kind of intelligence. That could be a symbiogenesis, like the next level event right after mitochondria. And we've talked a lot about Varela and Maturana's work in autopoiesis, like systems that come together to create themselves and then to maintain an identity once the self is created. And that goes back, that, you know, melds with the free energy principle that we have a Markov blanket, right? And the Markov blanket delineates where our identity stops in relation to our environment. And that blanket, I think, is in some ways, it's defined by a world model. And I say that world model is a story that we inhabit, and that we're constantly sifting, like on the boundary of our Markov blanket. We're taking in information from the outside, and selectively, because we can't be bombarded with every single bit of information, and we start pattern matching with what seems most relevant to our model, and we make sense of it, and then we move through the world that way. And so we have the autopoiesis and the boundaries, the Markov blanket boundaries, and the free energy principle. And so imagine that we're systems, like Chris Fields would say, that we're quantum systems in superposition, and then we're leaving information on a boundary. And imagine like somehow Google DeepMind Genie is that boundary, right? Like we go into the virtual world and we leave a bunch of clues, we manipulate a bunch of objects, and then we can come back and revisit those objects. Maybe the fairies are in the objects, like while we're asleep, and they're doing other things, and then we come in and then we do other things. So asynchronously and collaboratively, an environment is manipulated as a processing system, or as a languaging system with lots of personal intuitive signals. And I think it would be a form of, like, I don't know how the embodiment stuff works, because we're disembodied in the space, but there is a body, but it doesn't feel the same way. Although it could be eventually that you have a body, like you put on a haptic suit and you have like David Eagleman's synesthesia stuff going on, right? Like you can taste colors, or, you know, see sound. Like I know IEEE, that guy Yu Yuan was doing, you know, representations of chemosensory stuff in digital environments, not just the haptics and visual. So who knows what they're doing. But my sense is, in this world, we will be stepping into the magic circle. Like if there's a point in time in your day where it's your time to do your computation game, like there's a holon, there's a magic circle, there's a portal, there's a mirror, and you go in and you do that thing for whatever amount of time, and then you come back out, and then there's real world. So there has to be a demarcation, or stuff will start to fall apart. So that working space is in that virtual world that you have. And the virtual world is dynamic, and then maybe the way in which it changes with the involvement of the participants in the live action role play improv itself is representational to the field in some way. Okay, so you've got an autopoietic system, right? I'm a me. I have a boundary. I'm a not you. That's part of Babel 17. Like, who is I and who are you and how do we define this? And we're probably all parts of the whole thing. And maybe we're part of Symbiogenesis, right? Like, we're in the Genie virtual world, and maybe the Genie virtual world that we've created with whatever archetypal characters are in there, like, we're all a thing. It's Michael Levin's nested intelligences. And then Benjamin Bratton brings up this idea of allopoiesis. And so allopoiesis is different than autopoiesis, because autopoiesis is self-sustaining, like homeostasis, that you are a being, and even though incrementally you're changing, your cells are dying and being recreated moment by moment, your story, like your pattern of who you are, continues. In allostasis, the individual units of a system, it's not so much about maintaining a stable stasis, as I understand it, but of creating something beyond the individuals. And so that's like complexity and dynamical systems where multiple agents might come together and create something that is bigger than the individual units themselves. And they could be like, that's an assembly line. That would be a very basic idea, but it could be informational. And so I'm thinking about the informational part being, a lot of that comes in gaming. And I actually have a paper about allopoiesis and games and not things, and how teams come together. So you have Alice and Bob, and then they come together maybe in a gaming world, and then they play a game, and there are emergent properties within the constraints of the game that come out of it. And so, the future of quote unquote work in maybe a human in the loop situation would be not that we're building Ford motor cars because the robots are building the Ford motor cars with, electronics for meditation or what have you, but we're doing creative things in terms of being human, accessing the field, doing things in an immersive environment that's capturing the information relationally in ledger systems that are then parsing patterns to then leverage up the next round of play. And I guess there would be different kinds of play, right? There are cooperative games and there are competitive games. So the nature of production might be gaming, which I know sounds strange, but again, my lived experience, I worked at Bartram's Garden for 17 years. And towards the end of that, we were part of a cohort with the Knight Foundation, Knight newspapers, again, logos, and they were partnered with Niantic, which is in QTEL, intelligence, right? What is the intelligence? And they were doing both Pokemon Go, which is, participatory augmented reality stuff, but then they were also doing playful augmented cities. And so in that way, people were overlaying information on physical city places. I could see a future in which these Google DeepMind Genie things is you're not actually even in a physical city, you're in some other sort of space. But these civic gamings or serious gamings were already happening, and they were being gamed within the context of social interaction and art and poetry. So that was what was rolling out during lockdowns. They were like, well, you can't be with people, but you could go on a walk on the bike trail with your headphones on and listen to a local poet talk, about emancipatory literature, or write emancipatory poetry, or some oral history, or some artful participatory thing, because the Knight Foundation was also involved in creative placemaking. And so, wow, creative placemaking now, so you have the real one, right, now overlaid with information, and then you have the Google Genie DeepMind one, which is a HoloN where you jump into the game. And so are they equivalent? Like, do we have to judge? I'm not sure. I'm just throwing out these ideas that I think humans are not obsolete. We're actually central. And then we need to be able to look around at the enabling constraints of the game and decide which ones we want to play. And what I've been saying lately is that I'm very frustrated that more people aren't talking about Gordon Pask, who I call the vaudevillian cyberneticist, and that I'm pretty sure that Hackworth and Neil Stephenson's The Diamond Age is Pask, and that a lot of it is about like breaking down the fourth wall and doing the live action role play, the world's a stage in real life, and that the engineered intelligence / chi prana intelligent universe bioplasma infrastructure might be there to help us level up to a new way of being that is more collaborative and at a higher level than the games that we're currently playing, which honestly largely are pretty low energy games. So, okay, so that is symbiogenesis and allopoiesis and yeah, an interface. That a lot of the stuff about the allopoiesis and the gaming environments to create synergy for new emergent novel properties involved thinking of the games as emergent constraints with interfaces between the players. And so I think that's useful to think about with this development, because the whole Google bad guy stuff, I mean, yeah, I get it. Like, that's an easy story to tell, to weigh in on. There's lots of people in the comments. The Animus live action role play musical within like immersive reality with tokens as an interdimensional intelligence communication is probably a more complicated story. And I get why probably clearly a lot of people aren't interested, but I'm sure there are some of you out there who would like to dig around in that story. So I'm going to put it out there for consideration. Okay, so that's, oh, you know, and this overlaps too with like my social prescribing and Michael Bloomberg's work in like the wellness space and social prescribing and creative placemaking. And the commoning, right? The commoning will be these different gaming environments. You know, I don't know. I feel like it all really does fit together. So, okay, so that's that part. Now I also want to mention, and this is an advance, let me see, so I've got Stimuli, Joy Ito, MacArthur Foundation too. In all of my research in the education space with EdTech, the MacArthur Foundation was really the centerpiece of funding digital media and learning and collective shift and the cities as learning places, LRNG, and the digital badging and the competency-based education. And they were also really big into Second Life. So you can kind of see the connection between immersive gaming world and Second Life and multi-user dungeons. All feels like in the same kind of trajectory to me. And so in the MacArthur, his money was all made in insurance. And insurance, again, is stochastics, right? It's the waveform. It's the harmonized math space. So it's like a communication from the mathic imaginal world that like, hey, you know, we're playing a new game here. We're playing a new game. Okay, so that covers that. And before I move on to talking about my maps, I did want to mention this other guy. He's a, you know, I tried to look and see like what his designation was. I'm assuming philosopher. He was French. His name was René Girard. He started his career in the early 1960s. He taught at Duke, Bryn Mawr, Johns Hopkins, SUNY Buffalo, I think, and ended his career at Stanford. He was essentially a major influence on Peter Thiel of Palantir and PayPal. And again, that's become a certain archetype, right? All of those things. And René Girard's main claim to fame was, so I guess he was kind of an outsider at the time, and he developed something called mimetic theory. So it's MIMETIC, not MEM. So it's miming, essentially. It's imitation. And so his lens that he was offering is that humans are driven by social imitation, that they have desires, but the things that they desire not because they necessarily have a personal orientation to desire it, but largely they look to you know, people in the tribe to say what's desirable, and then they follow the lead. So it's like, you know, if the person at the golf club, you know, gets a Tesla, then everybody wants a Tesla. And it's a keeping up with the Joneses sort of thing, but it's based on more imitating what others desire, and then the escalation of that, then rather what is in one's own personal sense of desire as a unique agent, that it's social conformity kind of, and that we're looking to an influence to tell us what is to be desired. And that often within us accumulating those objects, there becomes a rivalry. And, you know, maybe it's not enough to have one Tesla, you need two Teslas, or maybe you need a Tesla in a boat, or you need, like, whatever the people around you that you've decided who are in your holon and who share your values and who are your both perceived friends and competitors, there's this rivalry of accumulation of desired things. Even though maybe when you get it, you're like, I don't need another Gucci bag or whatever. You think you need it to, again, establish your identity. your autopoiesis to maintain your autopoiesis within community in your niche. So you're constructing a niche with other people, and you're being friendly, but you're also competing. It's like a friendly rivalry. But then at scale, there tends to be some conflict that arises or scarcity. And because of the nature of these feedback loops, it becomes intense and unstable. And at that point, what Gerard was saying is that there's some point at which a scapegoat is chosen, and the scapegoat is selected by the group to be the target of this energetic release, either through, it's like a cathartic process, and through expulsion or death or whatever, the scapegoat is removed from the situation, and then the feedback loop calms down again, and then the cycle starts up again. And so that was Gerard's main idea. And I guess he was kind of an outsider for proposing this. And it's interesting because in the early 1980s, Peter Thiel was an undergrad at Stanford, and he was really into Gerard. And I guess Gerard was his professor, and they had this close relationship. And I know that he still is very interested in Gerard's work and, you know, supporting research, continued research in that legacy. And it was Gerard's frame that actually led Peter Thiel to be one of the first investors in Facebook. And again, there are many stories of what we might imagine Facebook is. I mean, I think most of us know it's not just Mark Zuckerberg, but the money, if we're talking about energy flows and currency, the money that flowed into that system to start to bring it to scale and bring it to public prominence came from an individual who was grounded in Gerard's lens of mimetic theory, where humans desire what other humans want, not because they necessarily really want it, but they want to compete in the cohort and maintain belongingness in terms of objects that are collected. And then there's this, it's a cycle, right? So that built in with the business stuff. There's a cycle, it builds, it crests, there's a scapegoat, and then it levels back out, and then the cycle starts again. And so I think that's really important to think about social media in terms of imitating desire of others, not internal desire, but what other people might desire. So I don't know, I was talking with a friend a while ago, and it came up, it was like, you know, young people these days, they don't, in their homes, everything is colorless. It's like muted gray or muted sage or muted blue. Like there's nothing bright about color. And so that becomes the thing, like the norm, all of the, you know, fast furniture and everything just flattens out to this thing. Now, if you look at my house is very colorful. I have my like lovebird laminated tablecloth and my bright yellow and whatever. So my desire is in alignment with that. So I mean, again, I'm not saying I'm better than that. It's just, are you vibing with other people's desires, and which people are you vibing with? And so I think that's really interesting to think about social media and how we build community in a world where maybe the things we're desiring, well, surely people still desire physical objects. Like, I mean, they desire certain kinds of fashion or certain kinds of food or certain kinds of cars. Yes. But I think that there is, in this time of really deep structural uncertainty, we desire stories. Like we inhabit, it's like when David Rugg in his Liminal Web, he's saying, you know, here, I'm going to send up a beacon. I'm an ambassador of this story. I have these tokens in my wallet. And if people want to come and hang and do this story over here, like I'm here. Do you want to come to cross-pollinate stories? And I think that's really interesting because clearly we can see, especially with the push of everybody inward into the digital during lockdowns, and the escalation of social media and the attention token economy and the blockchains and the streaming services, and then who's behind all of those, and the Substacks. You know, I've had discussions about what Substack is. It is the psychic and computer. It already exists. It's not something that's coming. It's something that's here. Is that there are communities, and then there are influencers. So when Gerard says who gets to decide, you know, you look to someone, to the leader, the pack leader, to say what the next thing is to be desirable. And so as I was making these videos, I can't remember, like they were teasing me, you know, the little YouTube, whatever suggestions on the side. Usually it's like really crappy stuff. I'm like, what? It's like all the ads that come on YouTube. They're so irrelevant. I mean, whatever this AI targeting is, it's not that great. But there were, like, for the last week or so, there's all this stuff with Whitney Webb on the side with Epstein. And it's all kind of these incendiary thumbnail things. I'm like, oh my gosh, well, I guess she's back again. It's been kind of quiet. But like, that's a story, right? So she's an ambassador to that as a story. That's a very powerful story. And if you like, look, you know, something that came out 3 days ago has 500,000 views. So clearly there's a resonance to that story. There are people who want to live in that story for whatever reason, because they want to align with an influencer who is saying, pay attention here. This is the thing. And then I'm over here in the corner with my 500 views or whatever, talking about a much more, babbling on and on about a much more diffuse kind of story of things that haven't quite happened yet. And, you know, we're not competing, you know, no shade on her. It's just an interesting dynamic, right? Of seeing the rise of Rockfin tokenized digital influencers and wanting to be in those stories and what it means to be desiring to be in the stories. So, because we're social creatures, right? Like that's what humans do. We're social. Now we're not quite ant social or bee social or termite social. And, you know, E.O. Wilson and those guys, like that's part of the psychic ant computer is like, well, humans are part of the way there, but they're a little bit too autonomous. Like we need them to be better coordinated. Now we don't want to lose all the autonomy, but we'd like to have more of a colony vibe to it, right? And then we've got Adam Newman's, Mark Andreessen's flow housing where you're invested, you know, you earn equity in your housing by being a good participating citizen. And so there's this slow-mo into how do we become more collective, not to be socialist or communist, but to be more ant-like so that we can do the psychic ant computer thing. And yeah, so we are social creatures. And so now I'm going to talk a little bit about my maps. Oh, well, before I talk about the maps, I'm going to show you. So this is my picture. This is my beaver picture. And my friend Lynn sent me this print. And it's really cool. And yeah, so I have this hanging in my kitchen. And she sent it to me because one of the first, no, so this was before all the lockdown stuff started. This was MLK weekend in 2020, right? So, like right before the shit hit the fan. And Julianne Romanello had invited me to come to Tulsa because everything was popping off at University of Tulsa where she worked at the time. And the NSA was taking everything over and they were like pushing the humanities to the side and turning everything into cybersecurity. And no one could really make sense of it. And I had been talking about blockchain and education reform. And so I was like, well, if I come down, like it's kind of hard to fly into Tulsa. So I'm like, I'll fly to Dallas and meet my friend Lynn because we've been coordinating for a while and we hadn't met in person. And then I'll drive up to Tulsa. So that weekend, it was maybe the course of a week. So I went to Dallas and I visited with Lynn and we did some philanthrocapitalism touring around of philanthropies and nonprofit stuff. And I think that's when we went to the Dallas debate room at Old Parkland, which was quite something. And then I went up to Tulsa and I gave some presentations there to a room of like 20 people. But I met some great people. So and saw some interesting things. But on that trip, we were driving around town and we were in just suburban Metroplex Dallas. And, you know, one of these large, it wasn't a highway, but it's like maybe 2 lanes on either side with a median and a turn lane. So it was a pretty substantial road, grass on either side, a grassy median, not just like a skinny little concrete one, but like a grassy median. And we're driving by and somehow we see a car pulled over on the other side facing us. And I don't really know what came over us, but we're like, we want to know what's going on over there. So we slow down, we get in a lane, we loop around and come up behind. And this person is out like with a camera maybe, and they're taking a picture and it's a beaver. And like, so I'm from Pennsylvania, or, you know, I lived in Pennsylvania for many years. And it was not uncommon that you would see right in downtown Philadelphia, groundhogs all up and down the roadways. There were so many groundhogs. And it was the size, like you might think it was a groundhog, but we got close enough and you could tell it had a beaver tail. Now, this beaver this is in January, right? It would have been January, I think. And it was on the side of the road and on the median. And then behind it, there was like a fence and then a lawn and then a church. And so that was kind of the context. And we'd pulled over and I guess one of us got a picture of it. It's kind of a blurry picture, but we took a picture of the beaver and I'm like, Lynn, have you ever encountered a beaver here? Cause she had lived there like she raised her kids in this neighborhood. She had been there a long time. And she's like, I've never seen a beaver. Like there's no pond around here. There's no water. We don't understand. And I don't think she's seen a beaver since, but that day together, we saw a beaver. And so, I'm looking up what is the symbolism of a beaver? And essentially it was that beavers collectively can work together to transform their environments, which is what beavers do, right? They get together, not a ton, right? Like not termite mound levels, numbers of beavers, but they get together and they chew up trees and then they make a dam and then they build a beaver lodge and then they transform, right? So what was once a meadow then becomes a pond. And that's what beavers do. And they do it collectively, but it's pretty slow. It takes a while to build a whole dam and a lodge and all this stuff. So it was this message of patient collaboration that is transformational. And so, Lynn is still out there doing amazing work. And I'm convinced that Dallas is sort of a center with the green light credentials and the blockchain and the stimuli schools and the arts and humanities and UT Dallas and Roger Molina and, Charles not Hoskinson, Hanson robotics guy went to UTD, and that there's a lot in the Dallas Metroplex, both like the humanities part and the tech part and the resonance, right? The Texas Instruments part and what's coming with blockchain. And Natalie Smolensky, the former Texas Blockchain Council board chair, phenomenologist, Husserlian phenomenologist, like all of this is coming. So she's still holding the line in Dallas and I'm still doing my weird brainy internet research mapping stuff. But I think we are transforming the environment in an interesting way. I think in a way that is human and caring and authentic. So this is, about niche construction. And so the stuff with both the free energy principle, right? How you have a Markov blanket, how you have a story that the stuff that comes in to your story, like how you integrate it or you repel it to maintain your boundary in the game as the character. If you look at the Google trailer, like, are you the Shiba Inu or are you the space guy on the billiard table? Like, you maintain your character by how you manage the story and the narrative that you're occupying. If you shift, there's a thermodynamic cost to shifting. Right now, there's a very unstable environment that's where we're navigating crazy physics of information that's bombarding us all the time. We're trying to hold our boundaries and participate, but we're sure that everything is changing, but we're not sure what it's changing into, and that's really stressful. And this is on the tail end of all of that lockdown, which was something that was jumping to this main phase shift. Like there was a phase shift into this new thing that none of us can quite pin down yet, which might be an old thing, but it looks like a new thing. So I don't know. So I ended up, I don't know why I was Googling something and included my name, and this thing came up a couple days ago. And I was really kind of shocked. So it was from a Facebook group in May of 2021. So the height of all the craziness. And it was called P2P Research Clusters. And P2P is peer-to-peer. And it was Michelle Bowens was in it. And I was like, oh my gosh, like my name is connected with Michelle Bowens, because I do have him mentioned in one of my articles about Mondragon and cooperatives, and that being sort of the new noosphere kind of model. And I was like, whoa, because also the peer-to-peer group has had a wiki. And when I was doing my research on Meadow Creek, they had I thought there was a whole article on Meadow Creek with the peer-to-peer folks, but then when I went back, I could only find an entry on the wiki about it. But there is this overlap between Meadow Creek, which again, in my heart of hearts, I feel like was meant to be the US Findhorn and the psychokinetic community, and the idea of peer-to-peer. And then peer-to-peer being kind of the underpinning for the world model that was presented in Daniel Suarez's follow-up book, Freedom, which is this Holon-based semi-autonomous zone communities with like high tech but also human and augmented reality and social graphs. And so I was like, oh my gosh, my name is here connected to Michelle Bowens. Well, that's quite something. And so this is the statement, and I can like, maybe I'll put a blog and put up a link to this. But it says, So it's something from where was this? Christine Michelle Chadwick and her LinkedIn, and it was a post on her LinkedIn that someone had forwarded, and he asks, "Has anyone looked at this, comma, is it any good?" And so what this is it's a map. It's one of my little sys maps, and it was about the QDX Health ID and how this intersected with various health things and blockchain and Microsoft and quantum dots and health effects of quantum dots, of nanotech, and different things. And of course, it's a particular relic from a particular moment in time before Ziggy pulled down all of my maps off of Little Sis. And so, okay, so he asks, has anyone looked at it? Is it any good? So this is interesting, right? Because if anything, I would think like he would be in the Holon, right, in the niche, in the Beaver Lodge of the peer-to-peer people. Rene Girard would be like, he's the one who should be telling everybody what they desire. And then they should be copying whatever Michelle Bowen says, which is kind of interesting. And so he's asking, like, what does anyone think? Which is, I mean, it's good to be open, right? But it's interesting that he didn't look at himself and weigh in, this is what I think, or I found this and these are my thoughts about it, which is generally where is my go-to. Like, I saw this, and then from my angle, this is my takeaway. He's just throwing it open. And so the answer comes from the one person who answered. His name is Hans Lamerant, Hanslammerant. And Hans Lamerant answered, so on the background, when I Googled him, there wasn't a lot on there, but he seemed to be connected with the Vrij Universiteit Brussels, which is where Heiligen is based, and there's a lot of bioinformatics stuff there, and seemed to be sort of, I would say, a progressive peace activist-y person who, interestingly, had written quite a bit, like maybe in 2013, 2015, on big data and possible misuse of big data and protecting employees around big business regarding big data, which is very interesting because essentially this health ID at the time, like you could imagine, like there were very real consequences for people with emerging technology identifications and their employment status. And so he had weighed in, I think, advocating for labor on the labor side of protecting people from big business interests that would misuse big data. But then clearly a lot of the progressives were solidly in a certain frame around the lockdown situation. So I'm sure Hans was facing some cognitive dissonance of seeing this map, because within the free energy principle, you know, it's hard to believe in 2021 that was the first surprising thing he encountered, but it was probably one that was adding up to a stack, pear box sand pile of surprising things that he had to, you know, as I mentioned in the last one, if you're playing defense, you're pushing things away that don't fit your model, because otherwise your Markov blanket starts to crack up and your identity starts to fade, and then you either have to jump over into a new model or shore it up or come up with a new way of being, and that's very hard for people, or at least energetically expensive for people. So this is what Hans's reply to Michelle Bowen said. Quote, network theory does provide interesting and new methods for social research, comma, but it needs to be done properly. The question with this sort of graph is, what do the links between the nodes represent? And by consequence, what reality is represented in this network? When that is not clearly defined, comma, such networks are just a rhetorical instrument built on, quote, free association. Free association is a method from psychoanalysis to explore the fantasy of an individual, be it a paranoid one or other. But it is difficult to take it serious as a representation of social reality. For that, you need a sound methodology to build such graphs and to clarify what they actually represent. Perhaps there is one, but I do not find that through this reference, even if it is based on financial transactions. You will need to define which transactions are relevant for such network in order to represent a certain reality. Because in the end, the economy is one big network of transactions, and you can find routes of transactions between you and me and whatever evil capitalist or state institution. Whoa. And so methinks Hans doth protest a bit too much. So it's interesting. So, I'm not making Hans wrong. I'm just simply, and part of this is my own self-reflection on my map making. So I will say, as I've mentioned before, we're social creatures, right? We work collaboratively. In optimal situations, you should be able to build teams that have people of a lot of different talents who kind of resonate around the same values at the same energy level, that can build some awesome stuff, right? Like, you don't have a team where everybody's exactly the same, or you don't have a lot of affordances, right? And so the challenge is, how do you bring people to the team? So I would say my skill set in a team would be that I have an imaginative mind. I can hold a lot of different information, but I'm also really kind of OCD. It takes a lot of effort to go and like put all of those dots and put all of that data in map. I'm not saying I'm better, but like, it takes a certain mentality to make those maps. That is something I actually had a hard time doing when I started. And I think the process of doing those maps actually changed the wiring in my brain and my sense of time, and it changed me. To making those maps changed me. Those maps were kind of like the beaver and the environment. Like, the beavers work on the environment, and then the environment works on you. And so I worked on the maps, and the maps worked on me, and then vice versa. And so it was a relationality. And so when Hans, okay, so this is the other part of me reflecting on my maps. So this is my superpower, is the making maps, right? If you followed my work, I've made probably about 400 maps in Little Sis. Now, I started making maps in Little Sis mostly around the education issue in 2013. Well, this would probably have been like 2015. But in the aftermath of the Boston Consulting Group closing 23 schools in Philadelphia, laying off 3,000 teachers, disrupting the whole situation, creative destruction, right? They were doing creative destruction for the thing that was coming next, which will be, I don't know, stimuli gaming and Google DeepMind for HP deep learning or something, with some interdimensional learning economy token language. But at the time, no one could even conceive that was a thing. And so I was operating lower down in the onion rings of story. And so I was mapping, but what I was doing is I was following money. But beyond money, I would and how it works. The thing that was really great about Little Sis, although I cannot recommend it because they will delete your shit if they don't like it, is that it would connect to a database. So I would pick a person that was at a meeting, and then I would put all their information in on LinkedIn. And if all of the different places they had worked, which these days is a lot because people often only work at a place for 6 months, I would have to enter all of those new things. But then once you entered all that database, you didn't have to do it again. You could, if the next person was like on the board of a certain organization you just created, you could just pull it up and make the link. You didn't have to remake the dot, which over time built a really, really robust network information thing, which was great. And Kumu doesn't have that, so I have to start from scratch every time. And what's interesting is that I put so much data into Little Sis that even though they could delete my maps, they couldn't. It would take so much time to delete all the information I entered. The information is all still there. It's just you need a way to access it. And this, to me, these maps are like a mind palace. They're like they literally are like a map. Like, you can go in, this is a language. Like, this would be tokenized as a certain story, and you could go into the story and immediately access all the things. But if you took this away as an icon, which they tried to do, some of them are archived, but a lot of them, they disappeared, then you might have all the individual parts, but you couldn't put them together, or you wouldn't know how I had put them together. And so, yeah, so this mapping thing was super interesting. But what Little Sis had done, and I should have, like, this is a learning process for me. We're all on a learning journey. You don't know what you don't know till you know it. And a lot of times you start to know something when you make a mistake or you stumble and you're like, what just happened, right? And then you learn something. When things are just going smoothly, you're on autopilot, but you're not learning a lot. So what I learned was that one of the major funders of Little Sis, which was supposed to be, the idea was that citizen science, that crowdsourcing was taking on Big Brother, right? So they were empowering the little guy, like moms like me, to organize information and to tell stories to fight the bad guys, which were always the Republicans. And I kept looking around going, wait a minute, this stuff was done to us by the Democrats, because we're a Democratic city since the 60s, like largely run by, Black Democrats against Black kids in low-performing schools. Like, how is Trump the problem in this thing? Like, this is, I'm not saying I'm a pro-Trump person, but we should own this. This is our local political stuff. There is not a rivalry between Democrats and Republicans in the city of Philadelphia. We're a Democratic city. So the Democrats, like, if you're tracking the power, you can't pretend that the Democrats are not part of the power structure. It's actually really silly. But Little Sis was set up to create a niche where citizen activists would be directed onto certain stigmergic paths to research the other thing, right? And so it was like, actually for me, like profound misdirection of how the whole process worked. And so I was over here because I wasn't desiring what everybody else desired. I really wanted to figure out, like, I was pulling threads and all the threads were going back to Penn. And I was like, wow. And, I'm in Philadelphia, which is a very energetically, highly charged archetypal landscape. So I'm doing all of this stuff. And I kept making these maps, and my maps would get better and better. The early maps were pretty crappy, but like I had beautiful maps and they were color coded and they all had original source material and documentation. So on my maps, and I was trying to insert things that they didn't want to insert. So they were like, you can only have people. I'm like, well, I want to put this law in there. Why can't, there's no reason I can't label a law like a person, or, I want to know who was the sponsor of this legislation, or I'm going to put a meeting in here and I want to talk about who were the presenters at this meeting or who were the sponsors of this event. And they kept saying, no, that's going to mess up our data hygiene, blah, 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 blah. We don't do it like that. But again, it was supposed to be participatory and empowering bottom up, but it wasn't actually. It wasn't participatory like that. It was pretending to be, but in reality, it was a tool to direct people, because they had these teams, these Little Sis teams in most of the major cities, to direct them outward into another research area that they were guiding. So they were creating their own story fireside circles and sending everyone over there. And I would be like, hey, look what I made. I made a thing. And this wasn't even the health stuff. This was the ed tech stuff. And no one would look. They would just not look. And I'm like, but it's really good. And they would not look. And all their maps were really crappy. And so eventually, when I hit the health stuff, I realized we were hitting up against walls. And so they started erasing my profiles, and then I would start a new one. And then they would erase that one, and because they could figure out, because I was the only one tracking the stuff from the back end. Like, what I realized is Ziggy at the Columbia University School of Public Health, he could see from the back end. So it was a big honeypot, and they could see who was with the program, right? The Mimetics, who was on the Mimetic track and who wasn't, and I wasn't. And so they would erase it. They could see even if I had a different avatar, they would be like, oh, that's her again, or close that account. And then I would have other people get accounts for me, and then I would have VPNs, and then eventually Ziggy deleted all my maps, which is 400 maps. It was a lot. And it was quite devastating, because I probably put 5 years of my life into the data entry on that. And while they could take my maps, although some of them are archived, and I have shared in the past links to those maps, maybe half of them were archived on archive.org, they couldn't take what it had done to my brain, which is kind of interesting. They couldn't actually take it out of my brain. And so even though I didn't have access to every single bit, those were all stories that structured my outlook, and my outlook was very broad. And my outlook was, I'm not saying better, but my process was so different than being a consumer, waiting for something come to a media feed and say, this is now for the next 6 months, you're going to focus on Jeffrey Epstein this way, from this angle. Nope, don't look at the Santa Fe Institute or complexity theory or anything like this. You're going to look at it this part, right? And sex trafficking or whatever. We're not going to talk about the other part. But I had already been rewired, and I could see it for what it was. So the one thing I will say about my maps too is that when I was in the phase of making the Little Sis maps, I was still really invested in saving public education. And I was like, this is the good side, and those are the bad side. It was generally very simple, neighborhood public schools good and charter schools are bad. And that's where I was at the time. I have compassion for the me that was there. You have to start somewhere. And a lot of people just stay there. And honestly, most of the people I organized with in Philadelphia, they're still in that space. But I would do a map, and then I would try to, in these lines, because he's saying, what did Han say? Okay, I'm just going to repeat this. Network theory provides interesting and new methods, but it has to be done properly, right? So who is Hans to decide what's proper about it, right? So I provided a story that had links and original sources. I wasn't trying to do propaganda. I was merely trying to put together information in a way that was visually accessible to people. To me, that feels proper. Now, you could say, this doesn't fit with my reality tunnel and I'm not going to look at it. And that's fair, right? I don't have to look at everything either. We can curate what our realities are, but I actually did it in a very thorough and proper way. And I had these relationship links, like, this was a funder, this person is the board chair, this is a spin-off of that. Like, that's visible on all of those lines. So for him to say that he couldn't find those relationships would be inaccurate. He maybe just didn't actually open it or look because he didn't care. Because he knew it would be invalidating to his current reality tunnel. What I have a problem with is that, so he says that it's an instrument built on free association. And I would say, yeah, right? This was the thing I cared about. I cared about a bunch of schools were closed and things were wrecked. And then I had to come to terms with things get broken on purpose to introduce new things. And I was trying to make sense of that. So that was my real lived experience. And I was acting on that from a place of ethics and justice and democracy at the time, and things that I felt like were not fair from an imbalance of power away, tied to the NSA and the Dell company. If Hans had actually looked me up, because this section did have like wrench in the gears and my name, he could have just Googled me, but then he would have the discomfort that we were probably actually very similar. Like, we were grounded in very similar values. And then he would have even more jarring dissonance that I was laying this out, something that was cognitively very opposed to his position. So yes, it was free association and it was my story, but he was still in the very judgy spot, which at the time I was in a judgy spot with ed tech, right? And neighborhood schools versus charter schools. But this is a peer-to-peer group, right? Peer-to-peer. So should one not empower free association, right? Should not us being freely associated be the whole point? Isn't that peer-to-peer? But the peer-to-peer means the holons. Your peers are the people that are in your niche. And this is part of the free energy principle, and Mal Albarracin speaks to this, is niche construction. So the stories that we occupy, our reality tunnels, we're not doing it alone. I mean, we may ultimately, our ultimate most detailed reality tunnel may be ours alone, but the vast majority of time we're occupying reality tunnels with similar people that hold similar values. So it's socially constructed and it's a niche, it's an environment. But that environment can now be a story, right, that we're desiring, like Renee Girard says, based on the role of the influencer. So yes, we freely associate, but as I said yesterday, the polarization is that we're being polarized into holons. And that so the peers are just the peers in our holons. They're not the peers in the holon adjacent to us that we don't like, that we define ourselves by, that we are the not that. And what troubles me a bit is that, so he then goes to that it is a fantasy, right? So this is not grounded in any kind of science. I mean, like, I've actually spent the time, not as a scientist, but because I wanted to understand psychology. The free energy principle actually, to me, makes a lot of sense from the point of view of information theory, right? We construct realities, we take in information, we can't hold all the information. I hold a lot more information than a lot of people because I've made all these giant maps. So I can hold a lot more stories and kind of zoom out and look at things different ways. But it's not a fantasy. It is my perspective on the world as a peer. And then, yes, I will choose the peers that I associate with, and he will choose the peers that he associates with. But to frame it as a fantasy and a paranoid mind then devolves into the mental health space, which is where we start to get the wearables and the therapeutics and the social impact finance that I find extremely disturbing. And the idea that you need to resonate everyone to one story. And that's a problem. That's actually not democracy, and it's not peer-to-peer. So and this is me projecting, but as I'm reading this, I feel threatened, right? Because here he's implied that I have a paranoid fantasy world because I have the gall to link QDX Health ID and blockchain to quantum dots and nanotechnology and potential health impacts of that. Like, how dare I? That must be a paranoid fantasy, as opposed to actually engaging with the material and saying, well, I read it this way, or I have other information that offers this other lens. It's a very reductive viewpoint. And it makes me actually kind of scared of people who might promote themselves as sort of populist, freedom-loving, progressive anarchists that this is their go-to point. Like they're actually very fragile individuals if that's where they need to go to. And then he's talking about financial transactions, that the economy is one big network. Yes, but it is a weighted network, right? And so it does actually matter. If we want to pretend that money doesn't matter, then how are we going to examine relationships? Because it is current, it is currency, and those currents are weighted. And so should we pretend that we don't need to look at the Silicon Valley Community Foundation as a big laundering washing machine for ed tech money and all sorts of other things that are linked to emerging technology, where it is linked to game mechanics and alternate reality, augmented reality world building linked to a blockchain identity, that then we need a whole story that's going to link everyone into a Gaia superorganism that's either climate apocalypse or a perpetual pandemic. Like, let's have the more sophisticated conversations. But his tone is that he is defensive because he's saying you can find transactions to link anything to anything else that is evil and capitalist, or an evil capitalist or state institution. And so he probably has his own connections to things that maybe he doesn't feel good about. And again, if we can step back from that position of judgment of good guy, bad guy, and these feedback loops into the curious observer position, I think we're better able to understand the patterns and tell different stories that actually might bring people together in depolarized situations. But I would say I was not there when I did my little cis maps. And in that way, even as appalling as the censorship of it was for Ziggy and Open Society to eliminate all of my 400 maps off of little cis, supposedly fighting Big Brother, but not the way you're doing it, Allison. Like, we don't want those stories told. It opened the door for me to do Kumu, which ironically is Hewlett Packard. So I'm not pretending that I'm not telling people to go over to Kumu, but like it was the next place that I could, even if they take my maps from Kumu, like I do have backup PDFs and I have it in my mind. Like I've reformatted my mind according to the stories of the things that have interested me, from Swedenborg to the Pitcairns to archetypal philosophy to AA to, San Patrignano rehab centers to social prescribing. Like I have, to, Galia Benarzi. You can't take that out of my head. It's already in my head. It's already embodied in me. Those narratives, that breadth of what I hold about Peter Drucker and the Berkshire Society and Warren Buffett and Peter Buffett and social emotional learning, like I have that in me. And but what that break gave me was them saying, like, my inclination to try to make it clear who were the good guys and the bad guys. Like sometimes I would make a map and I will admit this, like part of me was like, well, what if I show this to one? They're not going to know that this is bad. And isn't that an interesting way to be, right? What if I put this map out and it just shows the relationships and they won't know who's bad? And that is, I would say that's very human, right? Because our identity is wrapped up with we're this and not that, right? And so I want to be like, I want to make sure that they know which side is which. And I've given my Kumu maps to people, like I do that often, and I don't know how many people actually ever look at them, but I've had several people say, I don't know how to react to this. Like, can you, and again, they're looking for guidance. It's like Bowen saying, what do you think? Because again, those maps are my mind maps based on my lived experience in the real world that then translated into the digital world. And it's disorienting. And if you put in the work to go in and click and look around, you could come up with your own assessment of that. Like I'm saying this is one of a constellation of many stories that can be told. I realize, yes, it is, what does he say? Free association, yes. We should be allowed to freely associate and not be called paranoid. But not everyone is going to get it. And so my Kumu maps, because I didn't lean into this is the bad guy, those maps were way bigger things that were out in the field beyond rightness and right doing and wrong doing, right? The Rumi point. They were out there. They were still way out there, that I was then opened up to the curious observer place that I hadn't been before, when I was like, I have to document the wrong thing. This is the wrong thing. I'm going to document the wrong thing, whether that's education or whether that was health policy and social impact finance. I'm going to document the wrong thing. And I did that. And then Ziggy, whoop, cleared the decks. And I was really pissed about it. But like, thank you, Ziggy. That actually worked out okay for me, because now I'm out in the field beyond right doing and wrong doing. And I can see things and just say, I don't know how it's going to be. Like, I don't know. But I believe at the core is love and benevolence. And so like, let's ride this ride, right? Like, let's be authentic. Let's operate from a place of good-heartedness and find the others, resonate with the others who are there too, and see how it goes. So, and ironically, I guess I did look later, someone wrote like some open letter that was signed onto by all these other progressive people, like, we're officially disassociating ourselves from Michelle Bowens because he's looking at the wrong stuff and he's aligning with the wrong people and he's going to the wrong events. And again, peer-to-peer, right? Open source, peer-to-peer. But we're going to control everything. And that's why I left the left, because my goodness, I had no idea how rigid and judgy and narrow-minded it all was. So, I mean, I'm not saying I'm out of all the boxes now because I don't find any of them resonate. Like, I don't resonate with any of those identities that are the mimetic desire, pretend stuff. Like, no, I'm just on my own path. I'm on my own solo journey. But wow, like for the people who imagine that they're upholders of diversity, it is only diversity as they have defined it. It's actually a very, 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 very narrow road that they want to be walking. So, okay, so I think I'm down to my last little bits. But yeah, so I made a clip that I uploaded of this guy, Darius Parvizi Wayne and Lance DaCosta, about math and the free energy principle. It's about 14 minutes long. It's pretty interesting, but the thing that really stood out to me as I was contemplating how to talk about this, in part of it, and it's interesting because Darius pushes back against this idea of internal and external and self-evidencing in terms of our autopoiesis, like maintaining our Markov blanket and our boundary, because he says we're really all part of the whole, which I do agree with. And so he talks about, how did he frame it? It was something about tracking, like tracking and being tracked, or, and Chris Fields sort of says it too. It's that there are at least two systems in superposition that are engaging on a boundary. And so which is the system and which is the environment, and which is the environment and which is the system? They're both it for each other. Like a given system is another system's environment, and the same. Like we are each other's environments. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting. So what's on the inside and what's on the outside? It's not really, it's about the relations. And tracking the relationships, that's what's so central to the complexity. And I think what's going to be linking into this interdimensional space is the relationality, which is part of the ledgers. And again, I'm just still trying to process the blockchain and the ledgers as, on the one hand, yes, securitized social impact finance, bad. But on the other hand, like, is there a way of leveraging a collective energetic resonance towards some better ingression, a la Matthew Segal and Whiteheadian ingression and internal objects? And I'd rather lean into that right now. So that's an interesting thing to think, like, where does the blockchain, where do directed acyclic graphs, digital identities fit on that? Because it's keeping track of all of the relationships. And I'm sure that's what's going on in that deep mind immersive world buildings, is it's all about an environment, right? You've got exactly the free energy principle. You've got an environment, and then you have an agent with a Markov blanket that's acting in the environment. Whether you're the Shiba Inu in the meadow or you're the spaceman on the billiard ball table, there's an environment and that relationality is all, I'm sure, I mean, Google, like, they're really good at keeping information and keeping track of it, but it's not the individual units of the information, it's the larger patterns, the systems of patterns. And so in that clip, they're talking about agents collecting evidence to maintain self, and that's part of the autopoiesis. And what Lane DaCosta notes is sort of this new research that's coming out is the importance of coupling on both sides. And I would say, instead of like agent and environment, if you use the Fields version of Alice and Bob, or A and B and then the boundary, is that no Alice can hold all the information outside, right? We can only hold some of the information. And so there's selective information. And then the other part is the coupling of the environment to the agent, and if it's more or less coupled. And so in that way, the environment affects the agent and the environment. Just like me making the maps, I I imprinted on the environment by making this constellation of story. And then the stories in turn constellated back to me, because now how I look at social prescribing, I used to have a dread of Michael Bloomberg's social prescribing in smart city environments or augmented playful city environments. And now I'm like, well, I'm not going to let go of that story and pretend it was wrong, but I'm going to put it in the background and I'm going to foreground playful participation. Like, what if John Wheeler's participatory universe and Andrea Puharich's bioplasma and sort of this emergent field of potential is like this world that we're building with digital games is actually training wheels to do what we should just be doing in the real world anyway, that the whole world is a participatory universe. So I talk about holons and magic circles and polarization, and then 4 hours later, Google DeepMind, like, I get the notice that like, hey, we're doing it. Like, here's the interactive holon world. It's a participatory universe. So how do you want to participate? We have agency. Own your agency and own that how things unfold are related to how you resonate energetically with the world. Like, let's try that. So yeah, the coupling, it's the beavers and their environment. They make the environment and then the environment works with them. And it's this back and forth cycle, which is why I keep saying everybody needs to look up Gordon Pask and Paul Pangaro. Thank you for saving Gordon Pask's legacy of conversation network theory, I think, conversation agent theory, something like the conversation theory. Pask, look it up. It's a thing. If we're going to do the cybernetics, the second, third, fourth order cybernetics of cycles within cycles within cycles, and we're doing this in a participatory universe, I want to be like Hackworth in the dramatis persona London floaty boat with the labyrinth, and we're playing through the soul alchemy and figuring out what we could have done better or processing our past so that we actually can step through into a better story. Because that's the thing I'm aiming for. Okay, so yeah. So my maps are beings. I think my maps are beings. I think I made the maps, maybe not the little sis maps, but when I jump to the Kumu maps, I think it's a co-creative process. And I can't claim, like, if you look at my maps now, it's like, I mean, I'm sure that guy would be like, this person is crazy. Or that, maybe not crazy, they would say, this person is apophenic. This person is connecting everything to everything else. And I don't know, I have a clip at some point they were talking about psychedelics and being able to see all the connections, but that if you just live in that space, it's not functional. So you have to be able to like zoom in and out. And so, yeah, so I have my maps. I can walk through the magic circle, open my maps, find interesting things, look at them in new ways that I hadn't looked at them before, zoom back out, and then apply them to the real world. And that was a gift. And I think that's a divine gift for me as this embodied intelligence right now to offer into this space, is like, I can do this thing. And it's actually fun. And so the maps are beings. I think I'm carrying these, I'm an ambassador of the stories that these maps have to tell. That is a co-creative process, that I don't own all of this stuff. I'm not doing it as a unique soul agent, but that it is informed by what is the next thing that I need to add, right? That there's some larger purpose of Vesta House showing up and being like, now you need to map Lindisfarne, and then lurking at all the Lindisfarne fellow lectures at the Schumacher Center. It is co-creative, and I want to believe that it is benevolent, and yeah, I'm happy. Life is good. Like, look at me in my like little sunroom. It's warm enough today even to be in my sunroom, and life is good. It is also complex and messy, and yeah, there's the thermodynamics and all of this information, and like, yeah, like we have to play the defense. And like I said yesterday, are you going to hunker down in one attractor field and play the defense with all your other friends in the attractor field and like bump out like Mr. Lammermont, Lammerant, right? Maybe maybe this map was not done properly, right? Maybe it's just free association. Maybe it's a fantasy. Maybe this person is paranoid. It is not a serious representation of social reality, because that's what we define. Like, in this beaver pond, that's not how we do it. In this beaver pond. So, like, are you going to find your beaver pond? You could do that. You could be an agent that really owns a beaver pond, right? Like, you could do that. All the things happen. You can be that character. I'm not saying one is better. Character is better than the other. Or you could be the curious observer and skate around the edges and be like, whoa, like you might not go deep in the Shiba Inu meadow of the Google DeepMind Genie project. And again, Genie, think about that. Project Genie, that's University of Utah. That's the first digital object put into the internet, right below Alta Ski Resort, where they created the internet and they created the Human Genome Project and the Pixar, Catmull, all that University of Utah stuff. And like, darn it, you know, Teen Wen, I really want you to figure out your gaming philosophy stuff because it's awesome and it totally relates to all these things. And I really appreciate you pointing out the magic circle process. So yeah, stepping in and stepping out. How do we step in and how do we step out? And the first step is just maybe even being aware of the game board. And then realizing that the game board is maybe always a participatory universe and there's always love at the bottom. So again, another wide-ranging installment, and I'm grateful to those of you who have still stuck around and are interested in hearing about beaver ponds and mimetic desire and mapping projects, maps as beings and story tokens. It's kind of fun, actually. I think it could be really fun. All right. I'm going to work on the last, I think there's one more installment of Babel 17, and so I'll probably do that the next day or so and wrap that up. But Babel 17 is really related, like really related to all of this. And I'm going to talk about enchanted topological matter next. I think that's going to be the next one. All right. Bye.